So now I'd like to introduce you to Nicky. She is gonna take us through the 140 slides. No, she won't. Just
31. It's fine.
Just joking. Really fascinated to hear about your journey starting out with languages and then jumping onto computer science and natural language processing, and being a recovering academic. I thought that was amazing as well. So I'm really, really keen to hear about your journey, and also, you know, how we can, or this short history of women in tech that you're going to share with us, and practical tips. So over to you.
There are a lot of slides to get through, but don't worry, I will try and keep it engaging and short. I'm even going to reset my timer to see how horribly over time. I hope probably not too bad. Acknowledgement of country is always critical, and yes, just we're sharing our knowledge and learnings and teaching, and just paying respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. Okay, so this is a talk in 3 parts. As mentioned, I'm a recovering computational linguist, but I also did a lot of literature studies, and as any good closeted thespian, I've structured this like a tragedy or maybe a tragicomedy. The rule of 3 is that things in 3s are inherently funnier, more satisfying, and more effective. So let's go with that. We're going to talk about machine learning. We're going to talk about binders full of women and what to do next. But first, a note on the diversity. So diversity is much more than gender. Even though we're meeting on International Women's Day, intersectionality is a critical component of anyone who cares about being a good feminist or being a good human. I'm talking about girls and women. I can speak to that. I'm still learning about a lot of things, so please forgive my missteps. And here, have a unicorn. Everyone needs a good unicorn. I will be talking about more than just gender though, because it turns out things are really complicated. We'll see how we go. So let's jump in. Machine learning. Can you cast your mind back to the before times? Offices, meetups, conferences. Things looked like this. This is what it meant to be in tech, except if you were a woman, then it kind of really more felt like this. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, maybe not you, but certainly lots of the folks who are in your Twitter timeline might be asking this. So let's just say, like, why should it matter whether women or First Nations representative, people of color, why should it matter whether they're in tech or not? Tech jobs are literally designing our future. And it's not just the ability to consume technology, but also create it. That's really important. Also, it's super lucrative, and it's a great way to lift people, especially women, out of poverty, reduce the wage gap, all sorts of things. But also, this is our future that we're designing, and we all should have a seat at that table. There are a few instances where that hasn't happened. In 2014, Apple launched HealthKit, designed to be an all-in-one solution where you can track your blood alcohol levels, your sodium intake, your steps, your weight, but not your period. Maybe menstrual cycles just aren't a thing that product team had to think about. But did they just really not talk to people who were going to use their product? When I was a young kid, I really liked PlayStation games, and I was super excited, even before I'd heard of computational linguistics, to get a newfangled game that involved voice controls. But it didn't work for me unless I spoke like my big brother, which was just really embarrassing for 12-year-old me. It is not cool. Another terrifying example is with crash test dummies that widely considered a great step forward in car safety. They were developed in the 1950s. They're generally modeled around 1.7 meter, 80 kilogram human. And researchers noticed that women seemed a lot more likely to die in car crashes and be seriously injured. So they petitioned for the use of a female dummy, but it was rejected. Now, it took 30 years for that petition to even happen to be ignored. And then it was only until 2011, 10 years ago. How long have cars been around? It took until 10 years ago for them to be mandated to use a female dummy. And when I say female, I don't really mean actual anatomical female. It's just a scaled down male version. So it's not even that great. But I'm getting carried away. And this talk isn't about the systemic biases that exclude minorities from the decision-making table. Well, okay, maybe it is. So in addition to the fact that representation in your product and engineering team is important, we should be hearing from these people. But before this turns into a rant, let's have a break. I need some pictures. Here's some pictures of birds. My daughter is in amongst there. She loves birds. She loves birds. Everyone needs good birds in their timeline. What about some flowers? Now these are all machine learning models, and they work pretty well. So I can search for flowers and get photos of flowers. I can search for ice cream and get photos of ice cream. Now, this is the thing that is powered by deep learning. This is kind of new and revolutionary in the machine learning space. It was basically fantasy 5 or 10 years ago that I can search for affogato and get photos of affogato. This is crazy detailed. How cool is this? We're living in the future. Oh, hang on a second. It would seem that some categories are harder to detect than others, and that's because of the way that these machine learning models are trained. It turns out that algorithms need really good training data in order to be accurate, because what they do, you get a whole bunch of data with labels and you stir it around in a whole bunch of maths until those labels appear based on the right magical features. But algorithms learn from data sets, which means your data set has to be good and have enough features to be able to make clear distinctions. And those distinctions are really easy for humans to make. Well, some of them, but computers are really dumb. They're really dumb. They're very fast, but very dumb. Sometimes it's not so good. So from a product perspective, when I go back to Google Photos, a product I know and love, and I would love to continue to be employed by Google, we don't get any results when I search for a gorilla. Now that tweet was from 2015. Is it just not a, maybe I don't have any pictures of, oh, I do. And there's really good precision. I can search for macaws and get macaws. I can search for spiders, but not monkeys. I see. And it's not just my employer either. Here, yeah. That was the past though, right? No. It turns out that machine learning models all over the place are problematic. Last year, a delightfully horrible experiment played out on Twitter. Using the mobile app, images that you post are cropped based on an algorithm. Now that algorithm, what's that trained on? We don't know, but these two images are both really long images with a different face at the top and the bottom. Anyone want to make a guess as to those faces? They've been swapped around. Who that other face might be? Probably no one important. You know, nah, it's fine. Oh, look, maybe Twitter just really likes Mitch McConnell. No, it does the same with stock images. This seems bad. Well, maybe it works with, oh gosh, doesn't work with fictional characters either. This seems really problematic. Moving on, some of you might have seen a fantastic film called Hidden Figures. Everyone knows that this has lead actor Kevin Costner there. That's an interesting crop you've suggested, Facebook. And this cropping issue of what part of an image to focus on, there are problems that are pretty widespread. This one's Yahoo News, and here we are back at Twitter. Now, this one I particularly like because it's talking about people who work in artificial intelligence. All right, so this is not ideal. This is quite clearly bad, but it won't kill you, right? It's not that bad. But here's the thing, again, all of this maths and those algorithms that are learning from the data sets, they learn from the biases in those data sets. And we know that those data sets are made by humans, and humans are biased. So it turns out that there's prolific and systemic algorithmic bias in a whole bunch of places, like healthcare, where algorithms heavily favored white patients over Black for additional medical care. Or employment, 2015, Amazon actually have stopped doing this and publicly went public with the information that this was a terrible idea, thankfully. Applicants, the AI, the machine model that was selecting which algorithm with applicants to go through the first phone screen was biased against women because it was probably trained on the CVs of their current tech population. And I wonder how many of them, say, were captain of the netball team. It can even be used in sentencing in courts, which is really concerning. So this is something that is currently used in the US to determine how severe your jail time is based on the risk of reoffending. And these are the two graphs that come out based on the risk of reoffending. It shows that white defendants were skewed towards lower risk categories and thus less likely to be locked up. And if they were, more likely to be locked up for less time. The worst part of this is that the algorithms themselves were found to be no better at predicting crime than random people. So let's break this down a little bit more. Now we're talking about sampling bias. So not just the data set that has our own inherent unconscious bias built in, but also sampling bias. So let's think about how many cops there are in the neighborhood. I've taken the data here for Australia. You can see that basically per 1,000 people, there are 2 or 3 cops per 1,000 people, unless you're in the Northern Territory, where there are lots more cops per person. And how many Indigenous Australians live in each state? Well, again, overrepresented in the Northern Territory. So now we have this sampling bias issue where not all elements have the same probability. And that means that we're sampling more frequently from communities with higher Indigenous populations, but we know that police records aren't representative samples of crime due to differences in reporting rates, police attention, and arrest rates, even if we're excluding any more problematic concerns. So the issue here is, that's some delightful formatting there, that the number of convictions isn't necessarily related to the number of crimes, and that these algorithms are just amplifying real-world discrimination. Whew. Okay, that's part 1. So we're going to go there. So keep that in your mind. These algorithms that are distorting what we see as fair and unbiased things that are actually just building on and amplifying our own biases that we may not want to acknowledge. So let's talk about women. There used to be lots of women in computing, and this is a problem that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. You're all here today, and a lot of people say it's a pipeline problem. Well, it looks kind of like this. Now let's ignore any systemic problems that push women out of the tech force after they've graduated from university and focus on this bit over here, before university. But even then, still really not an issue, not the right issue, because it wasn't always that way. So let's go even further back in time, back all the way to World War II. All right, World War II, there were bombs, generally a good idea to try and predict where those bombs are going to land. Now this, much like machine learning, involves a lot of maths, nonlinear differential equations, and at the time, slide rules. But it was the war, so there was a bit of a man shortage, and it's basically clerical work, right? So the Ballistic Research Lab, pictured here, hired a bunch of women. And as the war progressed, everyone agreed that knowing where the bombs would land was really good, and so there was more and more pressure to churn out more results. So a programmable general purpose electronic calculator was proposed, one that would automate the computing process. And this project was given to those 2 folks in the back, Adele Goldstein and Herman Goldstein. Now, these 2 people, they got to select and train the first set of programmers for this general purpose calculator. Now, Adele was actually teaching these women already. The women who were doing all the maths by hand were known as computers, by the way, because they were actually doing the calculations. Also, a quick aside on Adele, she was freaking awesome. She had a maths background, which brought her to the research lab. She taught there. She sounds pretty radical. Adele ambled into class with a cigarette hanging out of the corner of her mouth, walked over to a table and threw one leg over its corner and began to lecture. She's pretty cool. Oh, and did I mention that she also wrote the first technical manual for a computer ever? And she kept working after having kids in World War II. It's certified badass. But anyway, back to our computers, or rather the first programmers. They selected 6 women to become, to go from human computers to machine operators. And these women were the first programmers of the first programmable electronic general purpose digital computer, the ENIAC. And the self-confidence of these women was actually the critical factor in determining whether or not they had a place at the table. I love Jean Bartik's quote here. I had no idea what the job was or what the ENIAC was. All I knew was that I was getting in on the ground floor of something new, and I believed I could learn and do anything as well as anyone else. And bloody hell, can't we just, this is the thing, like I believed I could learn and do anything as well as anyone else. So we've got these programmers. Back to programming. Did I mention that it was on punch cards? Because did I mention hardcore? And debugging the program actually meant climbing inside the computer, searching for faulty connections. So how did we get in a few short years from this to this? This quote from 1953, it really amazed me that men were programmers because I thought it was women's work. How did we get from this to this? Well, the war ended, and this was widely considered to be a good thing, and I have to agree there, but there were a whole bunch of unforeseen consequences. And one of the consequences was that there were men back in the communities and they needed jobs that women had been filling while they were away. And for a while, the programming jobs were safe because, after all, the women hadn't taken over those men's roles. They hadn't been replacing men in those roles. They were new positions. No soldier returning from the war already had the skill set that women did, but computing was a good job and people flocked to it. There were a bunch of new colleges and training methods that were opened, and even putting aside that the fact that access to education is not evenly distributed and certainly wasn't at the time, but between men and women, there were other factors at play here. Eventually there were too many candidates. And what do you do when you have too many candidates? Well, Amazon figured it out. You use aptitude tests. Hang on a second here. Now, one of the problems with those aptitude tests is that the personality profiles that they selected for were more around the idea of a detached antisocial programmer. And these created gender-biased feedback loops that reinforced these stereotypes. This was what happened to the women. We were automated out in a time before machine learning, but actually when machine learning was happening really manually, I guess. So where to now? Computing has been historically female dominated and then male dominated. We know that it's a societal issue, but what do we do? When somebody think of the children. So when we're looking at when girls start to lose interest in tech, and when I say that, I don't actually mean that at all. They don't lose interest, but they learn that they shouldn't be interested. Because when you talk to kids in primary school, boys and girls show interest in STEM and tech careers at about the same rates. This is an American study from Microsoft. But then we see that actually by middle school and high school, the numbers start to drop off. It's known a little bit as this middle school cliff, and there are lots and lots of theories about it. Are there not enough role models? Is it puberty? The fact that girls suddenly become aware of a peer group and what their friends are thinking 2 years earlier on average than boys, and they suddenly become aware of computer science's image problem and they opt out? Is that what's happening? Or maybe it's that girls are socialized to be more focused in the caring professions, like medicine is fine, but preferably like pediatrics, Or maybe you could be a lawyer, but you should be a human rights lawyer, right? Ultimately, a lot of people are saying that it's too late to get girls, to get women in university interested in STEM because they've already chosen a path that leads them away from it. And then because we don't have women in computer science degrees, there's nowhere near enough qualified women to fill those roles. And this is where that pipeline problem, this is where that, hang on, there's a bunch of other stuff here. There's a bunch of misogyny for one thing. And also this frames the problem as women. Women are not the problem. Girls are not the problem. This frames the issue as being endemic to girls, intractable, and universities can conveniently say, oh, it's before us, it's too hard for us to do anything about it. This smells a lot like fixing women, and the solution is never to fix women. God. So let's just take a slight detour about some common computer science myths. So there are two here I want to address that if you aren't interested in computer science from a young age, you've missed the boat. Well, I didn't program until I was 22. I'm doing all right. I bet a lot of you all out there have similar stories and know a lot of other people who were not coding since the time they were 4. Another thing is, in order to work as a developer, you have to have a computer science degree, and that is also not true. I don't have an undergraduate in computer science. I have a PhD. It shows it's possible. But more than that, 50,000 developers, in fact, pretty much half who answered this survey I guess 42,000, let's rounds up, don't hold a CS degree. This is not, and we know it's not a question of interest anyway, because the ratios like of men and women in doing computer science degrees at university vary so much from country to country. Quite a lot if you're looking at the percentage of women graduating from university degrees. So the problem is not women. It was never women. Hopefully we're all on that page now, but I fear that I'm preaching to the choir. Anyway, so what do we do? What can we do? Who know the problem, who know the issues, who know what's at stake? Well, you can encourage your kids to consider computer science, to consider STEM, and talk about the cool stuff you get to do. The formatting again is bad. You can buy some plants, and you'll have to suspense for number 3 here. We need to work on this bit. Yeah. So let's encourage our kids, because it turns out that encouraging your students, your own kids, nieces and nephews, cousins, who knows, makes a massive difference in their interest going forward. Each of those lines is whether they're encouraged or not by their teacher, their mum, or their dad. So step 1. Step 2, buy some plants. Okay, so this was a fantastic study looking at how the objects in a computer science classroom affect students' interest, and how that translates the objects in an office environment impact the desire to work in that area. So they had a bunch of stereotypical tech things. So this one, they changed a bunch of Star Trek posters and video games to plants and nature poster and phone books. And they found that this boosted female undergraduates' interest in computer science to level with their male peers. And it made women more interested in working at that potential employer. Okay, so here we go. You heard it first. Women love phone books. This is the takeaway we can, oh, wait, hang on. Well, the thing is, it's not just the women, because in addition to the women wanting to work at that office more, the men wanted to work at that office more as well. Everybody wants to work there because of the phone book. Well, maybe not the phone books. Maybe it was the plants. Or maybe it was the fact that the environment of the office wasn't stereotypical, but was just a nicer place. Nothing against Star Trek, but get a plant. Here's another thing. Can we stop? We need to address the fact that women volunteer more often for low promotability tasks. So the thing here is that this study found that women spend more time doing work that needs to be done, but they know won't do them any good, won't help their career advancement. And we need to stop this. And when I say we, I don't mean us in the room, I mean organizationally. So we either need to value this work better, or, well, really, and we need to set up organizational structures to avoid falling into the trap of this disproportionately falling on the shoulders of women. Because if it is a pipeline problem, we also need to fix this bit at the end that's been referred to as a cesspit, because what goes in a pipe isn't always pretty. But I think we can. I think we can, because we have to design for the future. It's a pretty cool future. So here's a reading list. I will be sharing these slides. There's another many slides, but this was the 130 up to this one. And I am super happy to take questions now and also forever on Twitter. So ping me, I'll join the Slack as well.